You know, a parent shouldn't have a favorite child, and a pastor shouldn't have a favorite parishioner, but I have a confession. I have a favorite parishioner. And once I tell you who it is, I don't think you'll blame me, because she inspires every single one of us. She was about 70 years old when I first came to this church in 1993. This Wednesday, Virginia Holiday, will you stand up? Virginia will be 92 this Wednesday. By the way, she's still doing all of the things she did 22 years ago. And even more, aren't you? What'd she say? It has been said that other than the Bible, no book has been read more than Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. I don't know if that's true, but I can guarantee you that no story has been seen as many times. I Googled it and tried to count all of the different film versions of A Christmas Carol so I could tell you how many there were, but I got tired of counting. And then there are all of the theatrical stage productions of the show. Some, and they're shown all around the world, some are non-musical versions of it, some are musical versions of it, some are even operatic versions of the story. And then you have all of the adaptations. Stories that don't mention the same characters that are in A Christmas Carol, but have a very similar plot. The movie It's a Wonderful Life, for instance, is an adaptation of A Christmas Carol. It's a story about a man who is visited by a divine spirit at Christmas. So the spirit can show the man his past, present, and future parts of his life in order to help the man change his mind and his way of living. But you know that Charles Dickens' very own novel was an adaptation. The original story was written about 2,000 years ago, and you heard it today. I have a hunch that when Charles Dickens sat down to write this little Christmas story that he actually wrote in 6 weeks, folks, when he wrote it in 1843, he remembered a story from the Bible in the Gospel of Luke. It's a story Jesus told about a rich miser who died, who did not live wisely or very generously. And then he dies and is now suffering in Hades because of the way he lived. But he doesn't want his relatives to have the same fate. So he hopes that someone from the dead will visit them and show them the right way to live. Sound familiar? But Abraham tells the man, I'm not sending them anyone. Your relatives have Moses and the prophets. If they listen to them and change their ways, then they will be all right. But the rich man says, but they won't listen to them. They won't change. But if you send someone who is dead, then that will get their attention. They'll listen. No, says Abraham, if they won't listen to Moses and to the prophets, they won't listen to anyone, not even a ghost. And Abraham has a point. It's difficult for human beings to change and to grow. We can be so defensive and protective. Can only look at things the way we want to see them. But some people will be vulnerable enough, which takes strength, by the way, to grow, while others will not give it a chance. It doesn't matter what kind of information you give them. It doesn't matter what kind of motivation or inspiration they experience, they won't budge. If they don't listen to Moses and to the prophets, nothing will get them to change, says Jesus in the parable. When we read the scripture reading this morning, we put an Ebenezer Scrooge look-alike in the role of the rich miser. Thank you, Barry Parker, for letting us do that. But really, the parallel character in A Christmas Carol, the parallel role to the rich miser who died, would not have been Scrooge, would it? It would have been who? Marley, Jacob Marley. Jacob Marley was Scrooge's former business partner who had died, and he wants to come back from the dead to visit Scrooge, and is able to even send other spirits to see Scrooge in the hope that Scrooge will change, that he will see things differently and live differently. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hand and sharp as flint, hard as sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red and his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. He carried his own low temperature always about him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. Wow, what writing, right? Incredible. Now, as bad as this guy sounds, I hope all of us can be like Scrooge. Because he changed. He was open to change. Yes, it took him a handful of ghosts to do it, but according to the story Jesus told, that doesn't even motivate some people. Now, of course, you're not like the pre-transformed Scrooge. You're not a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Well, maybe a few of you out there. But most of you aren't anything like that. You wouldn't be here at church today if you were. But we all need to continue to grow. We were not put on this earth to be stagnant, especially spiritually. We are spiritual beings, having a human experience. And having human experiences, we all face new challenges. And how well we do with these challenges has a lot to do with our attitude and our willingness to grow and change. And of course, the biggest new challenge for all of us each day is, are we willing to love greater than we've ever loved before? It's odd that this week's sermon revolves around this story, but because strangely enough, I was visited by a ghost this week. If you weren't listening to me before, I bet you are now. And like Scrooge, I was in bed when it happened. I've been in bed most of the week. Last Sunday night, I started coming down with the flu, so the bed has been my friend all week. I'm one of those persons who usually doesn't remember my dreams. They say we all dream frequently, but I wouldn't think I do because I seldom remember them. And when I do remember a dream, it almost always involves people who are living. But this week, as I was in bed, I was transported to Lake Junaluska, North Carolina. Many of you have been to Lake Junaluska, a beautiful Methodist conference center in the Smoky Mountains. For those who have been there, I was walking on the second floor of the building where the bookstore is and where the offices are. The white building next to the large auditorium. I was on the second floor walking on that little bridge, and I looked down below me to the lower level where people often gather among the trees and the beautiful nature to mingle and talk with each other. And as I looked down, I saw Asbury member Mike Dayob, who, by the way, is not dead, and my Uncle Bobby, Bob Hester, who is deceased. They were sitting together and they were asleep. Both men were taking a nap, which is not unusual for either of them. And I knew what had happened. Both of these guys were dentists. They knew each other. They had gone to this Methodist conference with a whole lot of other folk. They had to sit through meetings and worship services. And so when there was a break, they were anxious to get outside into the beautiful nature, and they found each other, and being two dentists, I'm sure they talked shop. Probably after about the third or fourth story they told each other, one of them dozed off. Then the other one said, "That sounds like a good idea." And so he took a nap too. I know that's what happened. I know these guys. They love their power naps. So anyway, I say to myself, oh, there's Mike Dayob. And then I say, wow, that looks like my Uncle Bob. But I know it can't be Uncle Bob. He's dead. I start to walk away. But I keep looking at this guy because it just looks so much like my uncle. So I decide that I will softly say his name, and maybe if it's him, which it's not because he's dead, but if it's him, he'll wake up and acknowledge it. If he doesn't wake up, then I'll know for sure it's not him, and I'll just keep walking. So I say, Bob. Bobby Hester. And lo and behold, the man stirs, opens his eyes, smiles, and looks up at me and says, "Oh, hey, Billy." And then he moved in his chair with all of his familiar mannerisms. And I was so very happy to see him, and he was happy to see me. And for those who don't know it, my dad died when I was 4 years old. And so my Uncle Bobby, who was my father's brother, made it a point to try to help raise me and my sister along with his 4 children. He was a great Christian man, would spend much of his time out of his dentist office over in the prisons, helping the men and women in jail with their teeth. Anyway, our conversation together wasn't long, but it was so rich. He said something to me that was so very loving and comforting. Something that I'd like to stay just between Uncle Bobby and me. If he wants you to know what he said, he can come visit you too. So you may ask, how much Theraflu do you have to have in your system? How much Theraflu do you have to have in your system in order to be visited by someone who is dead? Dreams are really amazing to me, and I believe very much a spiritual thing. If you asked me to describe my uncle to you, I could describe some of his features. He was bald on top, had dark hair on the sides. He was medium build, but I couldn't give you many details. If I tried to picture his face, I could see it a little bit, but I can only hold it in my mind for a little while, just briefly, and even then, not with the details. But in the dream, it was him. I mean, everything. Everything was there. His moles, his dimples, the way he wore his pants, every mannerism, clear as day. It's something I will never forget. And yes, if I had not had the flu and fever, I probably would not have had this experience, but I had it. And I am a better person for it. It was a gift, a blessing. There were two men, both happened to be psychologists and Episcopalian priests, who did a whole lot of work in the area of dreams. One was a man named John Sanford, who wrote a wonderful book called Dreams, God's Unforgotten Language. Great title, isn't it? The other man was named Morton Kelsey. He was quite a character. He did even more work around dreams. He wrote lots of books on the subject. So if you're interested in learning more about your dreams and doing dream work, then these two therapists and Episcopal priests are two good resources. Morton Kelsey and John Sanford. Just Google their names along with the word dreams, and the books will just pop right up on your computer. And they even give tips to people like me who have trouble remembering dreams on how to remember them better. It's been said that for us to change, to experience transformation, to be open to growth, we either have to have an experience of great love or an experience of great suffering. Either profound love or profound suffering. The experience I had with my Uncle Bob in my dream was one of great love. It's something I will never forget, and it has affected me. Ebenezer Scrooge, on the other hand, had an experience of great suffering through his dream, but it too was a transforming experience for him. In fact, when most of us are able to be open to growth and change, most of the time it is through an experience of great suffering. Most of our growth comes from struggle. And it's a constant process for us of dying and experiencing life. A rebirth. That's what born again really means, folks. It's not a one-time thing. It's a continual process. For much of my life, I have tried to envision my Christian journey as a linear progression. I start here and I end up there. As a Christian and as a follower of Christ, I'm going to grow and grow and grow and get better and better and better. Let me underline things in my Bible. Let me pray more and more and more. I'm going to get better. But it's not that simple. That's not how it works. There is a progression, but it's not very linear. In the progression, There are lots of deaths, lots of struggles, but that's how we grow. The question is, do we deny the struggles? Do we close our eyes? Do we pretend they are not there? Do we run from the pain or the fear? Or do we welcome it all and grow? If Ebenezer Scrooge had been a real person, he wouldn't have had suddenly just turned into Jesus. He was definitely like Jesus that next morning on Christmas Day, and maybe for a week or two. But after a month or so, he would have wanted to have fallen into some of his old habits, treating people unkindly, looking out only for himself. You see, the reason I talk about the ego a whole lot is not because I don't have anything else I can talk about. It's because we don't overcome something and say, okay, we got that under our belt, ready to move on to the next thing. If we do, we're in big trouble, because nothing, folks, is really under our belt. We are constantly needing to ask ourselves, why did I say that to her that way? Why did I do that to him? Or why didn't I do that for him? That is why it's always good to ask, what would Jesus do? The Christian journey is not like climbing a ladder. It is a constant dying and being born again. Charles Dickens plays a trick in his characterization of Ebenezer. Did you notice that in the hymn we sang right before the sermon, we sang Scrooge's name? Did you catch that? In the hymn, "Come thou fount of every blessing." Here, I'm going to sing the phrase for you, and then you sing the name. Ready? Here I raise my... In the Hebrew Scriptures, after the Israelites defeated the Philistines in one of their great battles, the prophet Samuel raises a great stone monument to God, and he calls it Ebenezer, which means stone of help, for the Lord has been our help. Oddly enough, there had been a previous battle that the Israelites had lost. The Philistines had beaten them, and it was at a location called what? Do you know? Ebenezer. So Samuel uses the name of a place where the Israelites had been defeated to remember that God did come through for them after all. He correlates the death experience with the life experience. The life experience grows out of the death experience. Ebenezer. Now, when we have a transforming growth experience, when we change and grow spiritually, there is one main quality that is revealed in us and through us, and that is gratitude. And that gratitude affects every part of our life. It radiates in us and through us, offering us peace and offering others peace, offering us joy and offering others joy. People want to be with us. If you want to know if someone is on a good spiritual path, all you need to do is measure their gratitude. I was walking through the room this week where our television is, and I noticed that the movie It's a Wonderful Life was on, and it was the scene right after George's uncle had lost the business's $8,000 on his way to deposit it in the bank, which meant bankruptcy and scandal. Not only will they be broke, people in the small town will think they embezzled the money, they will never be trusted again, and they're in big trouble. George comes home and he looks a wreck. He's pacing and breathing heavily. One of the children is badly playing Hark the Herald Angels Sing on the piano over and over again, driving him crazy. He's yelling at his wife and at his children. He learns that one of the kids is in bed with a cold. And George says, "It's this old house. I don't know why we don't all have pneumonia." This drafty old barn might as well be living in a refrigerator. And he starts to go upstairs to see his sick little child, and as he grabs hold of the knob on the banister, it comes off in his hand, and he looks at it, and he's so mad he just wants to hurl it as far as he can, but he slams it back on the banister and goes upstairs. And it's at that point I start chuckling, because I know that in about 45 minutes, George will be kissing that knob on the banister. As you know, after George's transformation, he goes home. He can't wait to see his wife and his children, and he runs into the kitchen and says, "Look at this wonderful old drafty house." And the three little children are at the top of the stairs, so he starts to run up the stairs, and the old familiar knob on the banister comes off again in his hand, but this time he looks at it and kisses it lovingly and puts it back and continues up the stairs to hold and hug his kids. Gratitude. Ebenezer had it. George had it. All of us have it when we experience spiritual growth. And the best thing that we have to be thankful for, folks, the best thing is that in all situations, God is with us. Emmanuel. That's what this season is about. That's why Samuel called the monument Ebenezer, which means stone of help. For the Lord has been our help. We have symbolic ways of helping us to remember that God is with us. One way is with Holy Communion, the sacrament of communion. Another way is the sacrament of baptism, and through a ritual we call remembering our baptism, a ritual we'll experience right at the close of the service. Dickens ends his masterpiece with these words: "He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world." Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh and little heeded them. For he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. And knowing that such as these would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes in grins as have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, and if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. The end.